Kash Patel, director of the FBI, files suit against The Atlantic and reporter Sarah Fitzpatrick. What's the suit about, and what does it mean? May it please the audience, I'm Rich Schoenstein. This is So Sue Me, and we have, hot off the presses, brand new litigation filed today in the United States District Court for the District of Columbia. Kash Patel v. The Atlantic Monthly Group, LLC, and Sarah Fitzpatrick. I'll show you the complaint in a minute, but here's what it is all about. A report that ran last Friday in The Atlantic. The FBI director is MIA, reporting that Kash Patel has alarmed colleagues with episodes of excessive drinking and unexplained absences by author Sarah Fitzpatrick. There he is, and you can go read in the entirety that report in The Atlantic. Well, I'm not subscribed to it, so I couldn't read the entire thing. But fortunately, the complaint, publicly filed in United States District Court for the District of Columbia, repeats all of the hot parts of this article so we can go through them. All right, if you followed me at all, you know I love a good defamation lawsuit, and that's the way I'm looking at this. This is not a political take one way or the other. If you follow me, you probably also know where I stand politically, but that's not what I'm here to talk to you about. I'm never here to talk to you about politics. I'm here to talk to you about the law, civil litigation in particular, causes of action in particular, and I'm fascinated with defamation litigation. We're living in something I like to call DefamationNation, because ever since Johnny Depp solved what he saw as the biggest problems in his life with a high-profile litigation lawsuit, we have seen a proliferation and a plethora of defamation lawsuits filed in the United States courts where individuals are attempting to respond to things that have been said about them publicly or to enhance their public persona or, in some cases, to recover money through litigation. And that's what this lawsuit appears to be about. So here it is, as I said, filed today in the United States District Court for the District of Columbia, Patel against The Atlantic and Sarah Fitzpatrick. And let's just look at the introduction. Kash Patel, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, brings this lawsuit to hold defendants, The Atlantic Monthly Group, LLC, and its staff writer Sarah Fitzpatrick accountable for a sweeping, malicious, and defamatory hit piece published on April 17, 2026. Defendants are, of course, free to criticize the leadership of the FBI, but they cross the legal line by publishing an article replete with false and obviously fabricated allegations designed to destroy Director Patel's reputation and drive him for office. Indeed, Fitzpatrick could not get a single person to go on the record in defense of these outrageous allegations, instead relying on anonymous sources she knew to be both highly partisan with an axe to grind and also not in a position to know the facts. And you'll see that theme repeated over and over again in this complaint, that these are anonymous sources. That's obviously a big talking point by this administration and has been now for many years about the so-called fake media and their use of anonymous sources. Now, you also realize you couldn't write an article like this without anonymous sources, because people aren't going to come on the record and say critical things about the director of the FBI. But that's what it alleges. And then we allege specifically defendants published the article with actual malice, despite being expressly warned hours before publication that the central allegations were categorically false. And I'm going to get into a little bit what actual malice is and why that's relevant. Now, if you go to the factual allegations, they tell you who the parties are and why there's jurisdiction in this court. The first thing you get in the factual background is a public relations, basically press release style bullet point list of supposed accomplishments by the FBI under Director Patel's leadership, including capture of 8 of the FBI's 10 most wanted, 40,000 violent crime arrests, disruption of 2,000 gangs and criminal enterprises, location of 6,300 child victims, seizure of 2,500 kilograms of fentanyl, espionage arrests up, cyber indictments up, counterterrorism arrests, disruption of 670 individuals from conducting terrorist attacks, 264 counterterrorism convictions, and seizure of more than 275 firearms related to counterterrorism cases. So there you have, first and foremost in the complaint, is sort of a brag about the success of the FBI under Patel's leadership. I leave it to you as to whether that's true or not, but that's what's in the complaint. Then the complaint alleges that the Atlantic has pre-existing animus towards Director Patel, having previously reported that he was on the chopping block and that there was imminent firing from his position. And then we get into the April 17th article, headline, Kash Patel's erratic behavior could cost him his job. That was the original headline. They changed it, apparently, after some back and forth. The article was widely disseminated. And then you have another set of bullet points that summarize the parts of the reporting to which Director Patel apparently objects. At the heart of this reporting are supposed issues with Patel's drinking, that he is known to drink to the point of obvious intoxication, including at the private club Ned's in Washington, D.C., and something called the Poodle Room in Las Vegas. Never been there, sounds charming. That early in his tenure, they had to move his meetings to later in the day because of his drinking. They had difficulty waking him because he was intoxicated. They requested breaching equipment, the kind of stuff used by SWAT teams to try to get to him. That he consumed alcohol and impeded various investigations, including notably the Charlie Kirk murder investigation. That he had complained about the look of FBI merchandise. That he panicked that he was going to be fired and he had what was called a freak out, that he was often away or unreachable, that the drinking was a recurring source of concern by the government, that he violated DOJ's ethics, that he used his position to target political or personal adversaries, false implication that he abuses alcohol and is made invulnerable to foreign adversaries, an implication that's become a threat to public safety, that he's concerned his job is in jeopardy, that he has a problem with unexplained absences and spotty attendance, and that he left the country vulnerable in the days before the Iran war because he fired members of a counterintelligence squad. So most of that has to do with reporting of drinking. I have no idea if any of that's true. By the way, I have no idea, I'm just going to say this generally speaking, of whether any of the allegations in this complaint are true or not. I'm not reporting the truth. I'm just reporting the allegations. But he is saying that all of that stuff about drinking and about certain issues he had, fearing he was going to be fired, or complaints that might seem juvenile, all of it is untrue. That's where he goes next in this complaint. He says each of the foregoing statements and implications is false. They are demonstrably and obviously false. And then he kind of goes one by one. He says it's not true that I drink to intoxication at Ned's or the Poodle Room. He says we didn't have to reschedule meetings. It didn't negatively impact law enforcement investigations. He didn't panic. He didn't have a freak out about being fired. It's false that he's often away or unreachable. He hasn't targeted political or personal adversaries. The complaint alleges he's actually taken significantly fewer personal days than his two immediate predecessors. So, in short, it alleges that what's reported in the complaint is false. Then they get a section called Defendant's Conduct Exhibits Actual Malice. Let me break in here for a minute. Kash Patel is a public figure. It is harder under United States law to sue somebody for defamation if you are a public figure, because public figures, we understand, are going to be open to criticism and even ridicule. So to sue for defamation if you're a public figure, you have to show something called actual malice. Actual malice is tricky because it doesn't mean actual and it doesn't mean malice. What actual malice means in this context is you have to show that the defendants knew or should have known that what they were saying was false. In an ordinary defamation case, the standard is more like negligence. They just got it wrong. They made a mistake. They were negligent. They were sloppy. But for actual malice, you really have to show either that they knew it and reported it anyway, or that they really should have. And so that's what this section goes into. And I think this may be the toughest part of this complaint here. They allege that defendants' investigation was grossly deficient. They did not pursue obvious investigative leads. I don't know how they would know what the Atlantic's investigation did. It makes it tough for them to plead. They say defendants ignored their own policies and procedures and went to print without fact-checking. They say they made a request to comment, but it imposed an arbitrary and unreasonable deadline 2 hours after the request was made. The 2-hour window was protectual. And then they say it was only 111 minutes. Basically, it was too short of a period of time to ask for comment, so it shouldn't count as doing part of the investigation. And then it goes on to say that actually FBI did respond through an assistant director who said it's one of the most absurd things I've ever read, completely false at a near 100% clip. They sent a pre-publication letter, was sent by his counsel to the legal department at The Atlantic, substantively refuting the claims on the record and providing publicly available counter evidence, and that the pre-publication letter requested a full and fair opportunity to respond. And here Patel is claiming that he wasn't given an opportunity to respond. He also says that White House Secretary Caroline Leavitt told defendants that the president still fully supported him, thereby responding to it, that the acting Attorney General Todd Blanche responded, and that defendants included these statements in the article only to brush them aside. So it admits that the statements were put in the article itself, but says they weren't taken seriously. The complaint alleges defendants ignored or willfully avoided an extensive public record directly contradicting their narrative, and they point to a number of things, including the FBI's operational output that we saw above in that set of bullet points, Director Patel's public schedule, Director Patel's congressional testimony and hearings, which are publicly recorded and, according to this complaint, depict a director who is engaged, the absence of a corroborating public record, and the publicly available history of prior substantially similar false claims that were rebuffed. That's a strange allegation to put in this complaint, to say there have been similar allegations made in the past about Patel, because if that's true, then I question what the damages were from this article. If they have already been publicly noted that this is out there, these claims that he is drunk, these claims that he is doing other things counter to his job, if that's already out there, it would seem to, tamper down any harm from this particular article. But the complaint goes on, a minimally competent journalist investigating allegations this serious would have taken basic, obvious steps before publication, and then goes through a litany of things that they supposedly didn't do. It goes on to say the article reveals defendants understood their sources were animated by hostility, that they were axe grinding, anonymous axe grinders. And then it points to this May 2025 incident on MSNBC's Morning Joe, where a claim that was made that Patel had been visible at nightclubs more often than the 7th floor of the Hoover building. And they quibbled with that, and MSNBC itself acknowledged the claim was a misstatement that had not been verified. And I think they did issue some sort of retraction of that statement. The fact that defendants elected to republish in different form claims that had already been debunked and were in active litigation is additional evidence that defendants either knew the claims were false or acted with reckless disregard for the truth. That is a restatement of the actual malice test. either knew the claims were false or acted with reckless disregard for the truth. So those are all the factors. There's only one claim for relief in this complaint, defamation and defamation per se, which basically says the statements constitute defamation per se because defamatory meaning is obvious on their face. That's probably true if you accuse somebody of being frequently drunk and an alcoholic. That is defamation per se, I think. It alleges actual malice. It alleges that defendants published the statements knowingly, intentionally, willfully, wantonly, and maliciously with intent to harm Director Patel or in blatant disregard for the substantial likelihood of causing him harm, and then says that the statements have directly and proximately caused him harm. And in the relief section, the prayer for relief, they ask for an award of compensatory special and punitive damages not less than $250 million, and such other and further relief as the court deems just and appropriate to protect Director Patel's rights and interests. So there you have it, 19 pages, pretty straightforward, a pretty straightforward claim for defamation. Here's the article. Here's why it's false. Here's why it's actual malice. It caused me harm. I want damages. That is a straightforward claim for defamation. As I said, I think the actual malice part is the toughest here, whether they've actually pled that they knew or should have known that those statements were false. That'll be an interesting battleground for the litigation. Now, it's been noted that Kash Patel has been litigious in the past. That's apparently true. He brought a defamation suit against an activist in Nevada, and a lot's been said that he prevailed in that litigation, but I believe the defendant defaulted. I don't know if he recovered any money or got anything out of the litigation. I think he sued somebody and they couldn't or didn't respond. He sued some years ago CNN unsuccessfully. That case was dismissed. He sued the New York Times. I think he ended up dismissing that. And he has pending litigation against Frank Figliuzzi. I don't remember pronounce it, but that's the commentator on Morning Joe who made those other comments. That matter apparently is in litigation. I think there's a motion pending. I'm not totally sure of the status, but it's not a blow you out of the water track record on litigation. It's not like every time somebody says something mean about Kash Patel, he sues them into the dirt. He's won some, he's lost some. It's hard to tell how much he's won. It's hard to tell what will happen with this lawsuit. We've seen a lot of civil litigation out of this administration. Often it gets settled quickly because it's against high-profile defendants who would rather pay to get rid of it than have to stick around and fight it. I don't know if that's going to play out the same way when it's a suit brought by Kash Patel as it did, for example, when Donald Trump sued one of the networks, and those were kind of handled very quickly. I don't know if it has the same sort of interplay there. Also, the complaint seems to me like a viable complaint, but it's obviously written for public consumption with those bullet point lists. Here are the things that I have done very successfully and should be credited for. Here are the things that have been said about me, and they're all false. And they're just teed up in bullet point form, so people like me will read them to you, and you'll hear them as bullet points. So mission accomplished in that regard. To the extent this thing is a press release, it is successful. I leave with these thoughts. Whether or not this is a viable defamation suit and whether or not he can prevail, I wonder if we think it's a good idea for the director of the FBI to be spending his time on civil litigation. Presumably, put aside whether he spends time at the poodle bar, whatever that is, but presumably he has things to do that are more important than spending time on civil litigation. And I know the lawyers wrote this and filed it, but he would have had to sit down with them and go over this article in detail and kind of go through it piece by piece, and he would have had to approve this complaint. He would have had to read it, and he has to be making himself available for this litigation, and he's going to be subject to a deposition. And do you really want the director of the FBI being deposed where some of the allegations are about how he treated the day leading up to the Iran war? I mean, is that a good idea? I don't know. I think you could have issue with why is he doing this, even if he's right, even if the article was unfair or untrue. And I'm not saying it was because I don't know one way or the other. But even if it was, do you sue him while you're still in office? So I don't know about that. The $250 million number, that is just a, stick a dart in a board and pick a number. That number includes compensatory, special, and punitive damages. So he's not saying in this pleading, I lost $250 million. He's not saying I was going to make $250 million by being director of the FBI, and now I can't. He's just saying if you add those all up, yada, 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 $250 million. And, there's no calculation provided. So I don't know how he came up with that. Seems like quite a number, but there it is. That is Kash Patel's lawsuit against the Atlantic Monthly Group and Sarah Fitzpatrick. What happens with this kind of case typically, is there would be a motion to dismiss made by the defendants. The defendants in this case would focus on their First Amendment rights, and they would argue that there's no adequate allegation of actual malice. And they may challenge the allegations in some other way, and they would try to get the case dismissed. If the case gets dismissed, it's dismissed. If it's not dismissed, it would go into discovery. And of course, at the center of this kind of case would be whether or not the allegations are true. And the defendants would be entitled to take full discovery of Kash Patel and his drinking and what bars he goes to and what really happened on these dates that are at issue in this article. And Kash Patel would be able to take full discovery on the reporting and the investigation done by the Atlantic and how they got to these conclusions. And then you might have motions by each side for summary judgment. And then, and only then, if you got past all that, would the case go to trial. Will it go that far? I don't know. Will it survive a motion to dismiss? I haven't analyzed it closely enough to tell you that yet. We'll see how the defendants here respond. I suspect they'll try to get rid of the case by a motion to dismiss. But as I said before, in some of these media cases, we've seen strange reactions by the defendants. So we'll keep an eye on it right here because I love this kind of thing. Welcome. Well, not welcome. You're already in Defamation Nation. Kash Patel, you're just extending your membership. So that's where we are. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and do all that kind of nonsense. We'll see you soon. For now, we are adjourned.